Do you know why the ancient Egyptians went to such lengths to preserve their dead? Why they perfected the art of mummification for thousands of years? Most of us have heard about Egyptian mummies, but what if I told you that the process was far more than just preserving a body? It was all about preparing for eternity. Yes, the ancient Egyptians believed death was not the end. In fact, it was just the beginning of a grand journey into the afterlife, a journey where you would need your body, your belongings, and maybe even a little help from the gods. Sounds fascinating, right? The Egyptians didn't see life and death the way we do. For them, life was just one part of existence. When they spoke of death, they talked about it like someone would talk about traveling to another city. They believed that when you died, you moved on to a new realm, the afterlife, which they called the field of reeds. But to make it to this paradise, you needed to ensure that your soul could find its way back to your body, and this is where mummification comes into the picture. Imagine you're an ancient Egyptian noble, preparing for your inevitable death. You've lived a good life, and now you want to make sure your soul continues to thrive in the afterlife. This meant preserving your body perfectly. They believed if the body decayed, the soul, what they called the ka, would be lost forever. That's why the process of mummification was incredibly detailed. It wasn't just about wrapping a corpse in cloth. It was a sacred ritual designed to make sure the person would live again, but in another realm. The mummification process itself. This is where things get really interesting. It took around 70 days to complete, and it wasn't done by just anyone. It was carried out by skilled embalmers, almost like priests. They had a deep understanding of the human body. First, they would remove the internal organs, which were considered impure but also crucial to preserve. Each organ had its own special jar, known as canopic jars, because the Egyptians believed the organs would be needed in the afterlife. But the heart was the most important. They left that inside the body because they believed it would be weighed against the feather of truth in the hall of Ma'at. If your heart was lighter than the feather, you could enter the afterlife. If not, let's just say it wasn't a good ending for you. After removing the organs, the body would be covered in a special kind of salt called natron. This was to dry out the body, to prevent decay. Without moisture, bacteria couldn't thrive, so the body would be preserved for centuries. That's why so many mummies still exist today. They had the science of preservation down to perfection long before we even understood bacteria or decomposition. Once the body had dried out, it would be wrapped in linen. But this wasn't just any simple wrapping. Each layer was meticulously done, with prayers and amulets placed between the layers of linen for protection. You might think of them as magical charms, ensuring safety on the journey to the afterlife. The wrappings would often be adorned with spells from the Book of the Dead, a guidebook for navigating the dangers and trials of the afterlife. But it wasn't just the body that was prepared. The tombs were packed with all the items they thought they'd need in the afterlife. Food, drinks, clothes, and even small figurines known as shabdi. These were like servants that would do your work for you in the afterlife. Yes, you even got helpers to ensure you enjoyed a comfortable afterlife. The tombs themselves were like mansions for the dead. For the pharaohs, these were elaborate structures, like the pyramids of Giza, which served as not just burial places but also monuments to their greatness. The walls of these tombs were often inscribed with scenes of the person's life, religious texts, and prayers. These inscriptions weren't just decorative, they were believed to have magical power, ensuring that the deceased could overcome any challenges in the afterlife. You might be wondering, was it only the rich and powerful who got this treatment? Well, yes and no. Mummification was certainly a costly process, and only the elite could afford the full ritual. But even the less wealthy were often mummified, though with simpler methods. Everyone wanted to ensure they could move on to the afterlife. For the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife wasn't just a possibility, it was the ultimate goal, the reward for living a virtuous life on earth. Their belief in the afterlife was closely tied to their gods. Osiris, the god of the dead and the afterlife, was the most significant. Osiris himself was believed to have been the first mummy resurrected by his wife, Isis. This story of resurrection gave hope that all could be reborn in the next life. But Osiris wasn't the only important god. Anubis, with his jackal head, was the god of embalming and mummification. He guided the soul through the underworld and protected the body. Think of Anubis like your personal guide through this dangerous journey, making sure everything went smoothly. And then there's Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. It's her feather that determined your fate in the afterlife. Your heart would be weighed against this feather, and if it was heavy with sin or deceit, you wouldn't pass the test. Instead, your soul would be devoured by a terrifying creature called Amit, a mix of a lion, crocodile, and hippo. Imagine that, your entire eternity depending on how light your heart was, literally and figuratively. Speaking of tombs, King Tutankhamun's is the most famous. Discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter, the treasures found inside were unimaginable. King Tut was a relatively young pharaoh, yet his tomb was packed with gold, jewelry, and the famous golden mask. But what's even more fascinating is that his tomb wasn't even the largest. Even so, we've learned so much from the tombs that remain. The mummies, the artifacts, even the paintings on the walls have taught us about this ancient civilization and their pursuit of immortality. Thanks to the dry desert climate and the Egyptians' incredible preservation techniques, these ancient bodies have survived for thousands of years. One often overlooked fact is that they didn't just mummify humans, they mummified animals too. Cats, especially, were sacred to the goddess Batet, protector of the home. But they also mummified falcons, crocodiles, and other animals associated with different gods. These animal mummies were often used as offerings to the gods, another way the Egyptians connected their everyday life to the divine. So, why did the Egyptians go to such lengths to ensure their afterlife? It all boils down to their belief in eternity. They lived their lives preparing for something greater, something eternal. Their efforts have paid off because here we are, thousands of years later, still fascinated by their quest for immortality. Their bodies, beliefs, and stories live on, preserved just as carefully as they were all those centuries ago. Next time you think about ancient Egypt, don't just think about the pyramids or hieroglyphs. Think about the people who lived with one foot in this world and the other in the next, who made it their life's work to prepare for an eternal afterlife. They didn't just want to survive death, they wanted to conquer it. And in a way, they did. Their legacy lives on eternal, just like they believed.